Heidi Allen is the MP for South Cambridgeshire. She is backing a second referendum on leaving the EU, and I spoke to her earlier about what the march actually meant.
It was, and rightly needed to be, a demonstration of a growing public opinion in this country that people are absolutely terrified, indeed as I am, and many of my constituents in South Cambridgeshire, of the fact that we may be heading towards a no-deal situation which would wreck the economy, frankly, and people are starting to get really concerned and agitated about it.
The Prime Minister is going to tell you later this morning, that 95% of the deal is done. But when you say people are terrified, you mean some people. And a lot of folk are saying this is just a march for losers that can't bear the fact that they were on the losing side of a referendum.
People really need to stop using language like that. You know, if we get a bad deal, no deal with the EU, everybody will be a loser. You know, this is a democracy. We respect each other's opinions. Some of us, we're on the leave side, some are on the Remain side, but it doesn't make any of us losers at all. This is about people. And I bet there were some people who voted leave in that march yesterday as well, on Saturday, forgive me. But, this is about people expressing their concerns and the fact that they're worried about the future of the country.
A lot of debate on Twitter over the weekend. People saying, well, of course they protested because they are the people who lost the debate, who still wanted to continue. But the people who won the debate, the Brexiteers, don't need to be proactive because they've already had the decision in their favour.
Well, I tell you what, if that were the case, we wouldn't have had such a tumultuous journey so far for the negotiations in Parliament, because it's without doubt the hard Brexiteers who've been making more noise and kicking off than any of the rest of us, actually. So I'm not sure that argument holds quite true. And again, regardless of, I'm not really interested in how people voted, with reference to, the rights or the wrongs of the march on Saturday. For me, this is just about people waking up to the fact that our economy is at huge risk if we walk away with no deal. And all they're saying is, if that's going to happen, we deserve a right to have a say in that.
OK, well, we'll continue that debate about whether it's right to have a referendum a little bit later on the programme. But let's talk about whether people should pay attention to a march of that size. A guy called Scott Allen tweeted me, he says, marches of this size are really on the wrong side of history. And yet you'll recall, perhaps, that 1 million people marched against the war in Iraq, but the Labour government then still went ahead with it. So will the government pay attention to the size of this or not, is the question.
Well, I'm not an expert in the success of marches, but I think, given that, what we saw in the People's Vote March was a reflection of what we're seeing in Parliament, actually. And, a lot of MPs talk about this, but it is genuinely true. No deal would not get through Parliament. It's a fact. There are significant numbers of MPs who feel, as the people in that march did, that no deal would not be acceptable. And that's why, I don't want another vote. That isn't my first choice by any measure. But when you do, the kind of the logic gates of strategy going forward, how this might pan out, if no deal comes to pass, it won't get through the House. So what happens next? And that was my question to the Prime Minister last week.
So the Prime Minister is going to give you her update this morning. Does she still have your confidence, Heidi?
She has done, yes. Let's see what she says today. We always knew these negotiations were going to be extremely 11th hour, and it really does feel like that at the moment. Let's see what she says. I think the difficulty is, because of the way the dynamics have panned out with, the likes of Boris and Jacob Rees-Mogg, the very hard right in my party, she could come back with the best deal on the planet, and I don't think they'd vote for it. And that's the sad fact, that I think they're so far the other side now that almost, she could bring back milk and ambrosia and they'd say no.
And the paper is full of, and to a certain extent, broadcast media too, full of talk of plots and assassinations, terrible language, over the weekend against her. So, is her time running out very quickly?
It's disgraceful, isn't it? The language is getting worse and worse. And that tells you, the MPs that are using that language, just how obsessed they are. And as I said, they won't accept a deal regardless of how good it is. I'd love to know, I think, the anonymity of some of those MPs needs declaring, frankly, because in a world where MPs can sometimes find it quite frightening to do the job, then they need to be called in and disciplined heavily.
That's Heidi Allen, the MP for South Cambridgeshire, talking to me a little bit earlier.